Hello, and welcome to another Skype session. Today, I am joined by Julianna Slager, who is from Ballet 5/8. In the past, we've had different scholars and writers on the show, but this one is particularly special because I came across the Ballet 5/8 company back in season 2 when we were reading The Great Divorce. And I discovered that there was a group out there that had put on a ballet of The Great Divorce. So it's been a long time coming, but welcome, Juliana. I'm really looking forward to asking you about how all of this came about and how on earth one goes about transferring Lewis's words into body movements on a stage.
Thank you so much, David. It's my pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit about Lewis and how his work translates into physicality. I'm such a huge fan of C.S. Lewis and love many of his works. And we've done, I think, 4 or 5 of them as ballets at this point.
So let's just set the stage. How did you get involved in ballet in the first place, and how did it ultimately result in joining this ballet company?
Yeah, so I fell in love with ballet as a small child. I was one of those kids that was super energetic. And so my mom was like, put this kid in a ballet class, get her out of the house. So I started dancing when I was, 3 years old. And it was just for fun at first. And I kind of grew into really loving it and wanting to pursue it with a little bit more passion, I guess, and with a little bit more seriousness. And so my parents enrolled me in a pre professional ballet school. And I grew up in Michigan. So this was in the capital in Lansing. And so they would drive me up there, 45 minutes there and 45 minutes back so that I could get really good training. And so I was really grateful for that as a kid. And I just kind of pursued dance to the farthest end that I could. And that ended up leading me down a professional path. And so I actually danced for Greater Lansing Ballet. And then I also danced for Ballet Magnificat, which is a Christian company here in the States in Jackson, Mississippi.
And how did Ballet 5/8 come about?
Yeah, so I actually met my co-founder, Amy Sanderson, at Ballet Magnificat. We both were dancing there together, and we would take walks on the weekends just to like cross train and hang out and stay in shape. Because as dancers, you try to do a lot of exercise that is not dance to like balance out all the crazy gymnastic stuff you do during the week. So we kind of got into this habit of walking this trail through a local park an hour or two every Saturday, and we just got to talking and dreaming about maybe what our next steps would look like after we finished being ballet dancers. Little did we know at that point that Ballet 5/8 would come out of all of that. But a few years later, both of us had moved on from Ballet Magnificat, and I had moved up to Chicago and gotten married. Amy had come up to Chicago as well. And we decided that there was just a lot of good art and a lot of wonderful artists. But we found a distinctive lack of kind of this Christian faith based worldview in the marketplace of ideas of dance in Chicago. And I think that's probably true in many cities. You see a lot of art, and all art shows a worldview, but there wasn't a lot that came from our perspective. And so we thought, what a neat way to engage with culture and to be creating things that speak life and are redemptive and speak to who God is. And what a great way to use our skills and our passion for dance.
And so what's behind the name Ballet 5/8?
Yeah, so it's from Romans. Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And when we were thinking of a name, we wanted it to be a little bit abstract. We didn't want to be like, Salvation Ballet. But we did want it to be something that was meaningful, something that would guide the organization for its entire history and would kind of anchor it to the mission that we had felt like we were wanting to put into the company at that point. And so the name has done just that. I think in my mind, I think of it as we reach out just like God reached towards us. We are reaching out towards other people through this art form. And then the ballet part, of course, is self-explanatory.
If I had been given the option of naming it, I'd have called it something like Galatians 2:2.
I love it. That's great. Missed opportunity there.
Well, now I clearly have to learn how to do ballet and then form my own company.
Right.
So that's the ballet side of things. So where did Lewis come in, say, specifically for yourself?
Yeah, so I had been a fan of C.S. Lewis ever since I was a young girl. My parents actually read Lewis to us as kids. They read the Chronicles of Narnia. I think one of my earliest memories is being like 5 or 6 and, reading the Chronicles of Narnia with my parents. So I've been a huge fan of Lewis for a long time. And even in my high school years and throughout my education, because I was a ballerina, I was also homeschooled. And so my parents would even use things like, the Great Divorce, or Surprised by Joy. Also, some of his less abstract works, less narrative works as well. And so it was neat to just see how things like miracles and things like that just became a part of my upbringing. And I would write papers on them, and I always remember thinking, man, these are more interesting than so much of the other schoolwork that I'm doing. And so I think that kind of sparked a love for his writing, that was different than some of the other literature that I felt like was more dry. And I think I've always been impressed by Lewis and his ability to take really intense concepts and just distill them down into these very bite-sized morsels that you can understand. So I've always appreciated that. And yeah, The Four Loves is another one. Very many of them, I think, have kind of shaped me and informed my worldview as I've read them over the years.
And so, which of Lewis's works have you brought to the stage? And this, my central question that I really had when I first found out about you guys is, how do you go about converting a book into a ballet?
Yeah, such a great question. So Meditations is one of the first ballets that I used from Lewis's work, and that's from just one of his short essays called Meditation in a Tool Shed. And so that one, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, David, but it's about that shaft of light that appears kind of through the roof of the shed that he's in. And basically, the whole thing talks about the different perspective of looking at the light and looking through the light, and how those things are so different. And he likens that to our faith, how looking at somebody else's faith and looking through eyes of faith are two very different perspectives. And so that was the first one that I created. And the light was actually a character, if you will. And I had this beautiful spotlight and kind of like this haze machine, so you could actually see the beam of light coming onto the stage. And I created a story that would kind of mirror that thought. And so I had a man and a woman who were married, and the woman was a Christian and the man was not. And the whole thing was them going back and forth on their different perspectives. And he's basically looking at the light and saying, what is there to look at? This is a dusty old tool shed. And she's looking through it and saying, no, there's something more beautiful, right? I see the green and the trees on the outside. And so that's was the very first work that I did. And it was so, I think, meaningful to me and to the dancers, and then to the audience as well, to see Lewis's incredibly beautiful words and ideas and themes put with dance and music, that it really set me on this trajectory to try to do that more often.
Wow, that's really cool. I've read Meditation in a Tool Shed, and I would have never have thought, this needs to be a ballet. But I love that idea. So which of his other works have you adapted?
Yeah, so another one was Surprised by Joy, which is such a heart-wrenching work, but at the same time deals with the subject of grief, which we're all very familiar with in our human context. Grief comes to us in one way or the other. And so I actually took inspiration from the poem that inspired Lewis to write Surprised by Joy, and then also from Lewis's work itself, and kind of created this story about Joy and personified her as a character who actually comes in. And you see Lewis in this ballet, and it's during his mourning period for his wife, and you see him actually literally being surprised by joy. And it starts out very sad, and then it ends up being this whirlwind of beauty, and just these wonderful like woodwinds and flutes and violins come in, and you see him actually swept away with joy in spite of his circumstance. And so I tried to just kind of use his words and his feelings and what he's putting into his work and Surprised by Joy, and I tried to take those and create kind of a moving picture, if you will, of that time in his life.
So were you composing music or drawing on other artists? What were you actually dancing to?
Yeah, so for that piece particularly, the piece was called, I believe you pronounce it Hermonilaire, and it's by John Adams. So anyway, he's just like a fantastic classical composer, and I've done quite a few ballets to his works. But to find the right music for that one was a little tricky, because it had to have a seismic shift from sorrow into joy. And so I listened to a lot of music to try to find something that would fit the storyline, which for me is really typical. I oftentimes will have an idea idea or a story and then kind of go on a hunt for the right music, which is delightful. There's no better job than having to listen to music for hours on end. So yeah, so that was a really fun process of trying to pick the right music to undergird that story.
As I said at the beginning, the first I heard about you guys was in relation to The Great Divorce, and that is my favorite of all of Lewis's works. So, how did it work in that case? Was it more of a simple retelling of the story, or was it compressed? What did you change to the story to bring it to the stage?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, I tried as best as I could to follow the narrative arc that Lewis lays out, but kind of similar to when you see a movie and you can't include all the details, of course, that you could put in a book. Making a ballet is similar. So, I did pare down the character list. I kept in people that I thought were really integral to the story. Like the hard bitten ghost is one of the main characters in it. The big man and the short man are in it at the bus stop. Of course, you have the narrator, and so I personify the narrator as a character that's actually experiencing the story as it goes along. And then you, of course, have George MacDonald. He's one of the main characters in the story as well. And then I had a host of different ghosts and spirits that kind of fly in and out throughout the ballet as well. And so some of them have names and some of them don't. But what I did was I went through the entire book, several times. I've read it many times and kind of did an outline of here's everything that happens in the work. And then I started to kind of pare it down just a little bit. Some of the characters, even I combined ones that had similar themes, like the lustful woman that you see that screams and turns into smoke. I kind of combined her a little bit with the man with the lizard that turns into a horse, just because they both struggle with lust. So there were some different characters that I could bring together a little bit in order to condense the story, because as you know, in The Great Divorce there's like a character and then they're gone and a character and they're gone, and which works great in a book, but in a ballet it's a little bit harder to show that without the audience kind of going, wait, who is that, so I tried to kind of make logical jumps that would still stay true to the essence of the story, but would allow the audience to get a little bit of a character that stayed with us, I guess, for a bit of a longer time through the story. So I made some of those choices. Artistically, I really focused on the concept of going towards heaven. Things get realer and more solid, and heavier even, and bigger. And so that was very interesting, but that's actually a very physical concept. And so for me, as what I like to call a physical thinker, that made sense right away for me. And it's one of the reasons that I chose the book, because we start out in Greytown and everything is smaller and they don't know it, but they're less real in Greytown than they are in heaven. So they don't realize that, but we know that from Lewis. And I kind of went through and built this whole trajectory in the movement where the beginning has a very different texture and it looks a lot more smoky and the movements are more fluid. And then as we go through the ballet, things get more concrete and more real and even more beautiful. So I tried to take classical line and distort it in the beginning, and by the end, when we're in heaven, everything is beautiful and pristine and just absolutely just incredible to behold. And so that part of it was really very fun to tell, because a lot of those concepts translated really easily into dance.
And what has composing and building and forming these performances, how has it changed your understanding of the book or your appreciation? Is there something else that seems to come out to you when you go through this process?
Yeah, I think for me, what is always helpful in this process and what I love about doing it is that Lewis's concepts are already so compelling in and of themselves. But what you do is you actually kind of put flesh and blood to it. So you take some of his really profound thoughts and ideas out of this abstract realm and you can put it into the physical. And one thing that I thought was really neat when we first did the ballet is I had several people that were like, okay, I didn't understand The Great Divorce fully, but then when I watched the show, I could grasp more what Lewis was talking about, because you kind of put flesh to the concept. And so that for me was a huge compliment. And I really appreciated that the movement itself could kind of bring this added layer of concreteness to the thoughts in the storyline. I think for me on a personal level, just working with the story that closely, I always see so much about humanity and I always see so much about myself. The most recent ballet that I did to Lewis's works is The Four Loves. And I thought that was just so profound. And I had read it once before making it. And then read it a few more times. But there's so many moments in there where Lewis calls out things that I'm like, oh my goodness, this is happening right before my eyes, right here in the United States. You know, he had one about the dangers of too much love of patriotism and country, and I won't go too far into it, but it was just really interesting to say, oh my goodness, like this is such a profound way of thinking that has just withstood the test of time. So I always glean many nuggets like that when I'm working on a Lewis piece.
So for the four loves in particular, how are you structure that? Is that like a series of vignettes looking at some of the different kinds of loves and the dangers of loves? Or did you try and tell a full story with elements of the four loves drawn into it?
Yeah, great question. So that one is more abstract and it is more vignettes, and we're seeing kind of how love moves and how it plays out. So in the beginning one in Storgy, we see basically a mother figure and then all of these children figures. And we really see, like Lewis talks about that a lot, the love of a parent to a child and how a mother nurtures her child and how it's a love that kind of just undergirds us from day one. And so I tried to really pull in that softness and that support. And in the movement, I tried to make it continual, almost never ending, and almost like you don't know where it started or if it's ever going to end, but it's just like this all encompassing love. And then from there, Philea, I added in a little bit more of a storyline. We have kind of an abstracted story where the lead female is friends with the lead male, and they kind of go through this period of mountaintop and everything is going really well. And then we see this kind of tragedy that befalls them, and we watch them try to hang on to that friendship. And I think Lewis talks a lot about it being like comrades in arms. And so that was something that I tried to show both with the leads and with the core of just that sense of being a comrade and what it means to like love somebody on that deep level where you would like go into battle with them. And then Eros, of course, is one of the most, I think, most overused loves, if you will, and kind of in pop culture gets taken in some very strange directions. And so I enjoyed making that because I feel like there's very little commentary on love that is explosive and passionate, but also healthy. So I placed that one in the context of a married couple who'd been married for 20 years and how they still have that passion. I stayed away from the darker side of Eros. I did like shy away from that a little bit because I feel like there's plenty of that represents that in culture. So I kind of stayed on the lighter end. But I tried to show how that love is a love that is transcendent and it brings people together, and how that flame and that passion and kind of that idea of a flame was my main motif for that couple. And it was just a beautiful thing to see how the dancers could embody the strength and the nurture, but then also the passion of Eros. And then,
what about
yeah, go ahead.
agape?
Yeah, that was the hardest one. Honestly, that one was so difficult to even put into words because God's love is huge. So for starters, there's an enormous core of dancers. There's like 20 dancers on stage to open it. And the whole thing is just very big, very structural. What I kind of landed on was creating these big moving sequences that felt almost like you were in the Sistine Chapel. So I tried to really find that bigness and that incredible volume, I guess, of love that we feel from God. And then I also punctuate that with really intimate moments where there's a dancer who kind of personifies God the Father. There's one that personifies God the Son, and one that personifies the Holy Spirit. And again, they're very abstracted, but I show how that love of the three opens up into the multitude before you. And so I try to show very big moments of that with everybody, and then also very intimate moments of that with just the three. And so that's kind of what I landed on, to try at least to give a little bit of an impression of what God's love is.
My co-host Matt, I think, would particularly like that, because one of his favorite things that Lewis says is when he describes the Christian transformation as being called into the divine dance.
Oh, I love that. Well, see, there you go. That's perfect. That's perfect.
And the other thing that I'm struck by, particularly say in something like Mere Christianity, Lewis is often praised because he presents you an intellectual argument, but he also engages the imagination. He gives you a picture to think about and chew over. And with these ballets, you're doing something very similar. You're giving people a picture, something else to experience, that will be the means through which they will be able to meditate on and understand and grow more deeply into the truth which is trying to be communicated.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. I love how Lewis talks about that a lot, about the baptized imagination and how that can work. And that's a concept that, yeah, I think we lean into heavily, even outside of our Lewis works, but just that thought of how beauty and creativity can offer you truth in a way that you might not accept the truth otherwise. And I think that's something that's really neat about how art can be just a co laborer with truth, and how they don't have to be separated, but they're actually two parts of a whole.
Hmm. And can be used to sneak past the watchful dragons, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, as we start to wrap up, I've got to ask, what's it been like having a ballet company during COVID?
Oh my goodness, that has been such a journey. And I'm very grateful that we've made it as far as we have. I do not take that for granted, because I have a good number of friends in the industry that are completely shuttered. And hopefully they'll revive at some point. But I definitely am grateful to be here, first and foremost. So we were actually in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a good 16 hours from Chicago, when everything shut down. And I think, it was kind of similar in different parts of the world, where we knew COVID was coming kind of late February, early March. You started to hear more about it, but then all of a sudden there was at one point like a very hard stop, and everything started to shut down. So at that point, we were miles and miles away from home. We were about to perform the Great Divorce, as a matter of fact, in Georgia. And the night before the show, unfortunately, everything was shut down and the venue had to cancel. And, we drove back. But one thing that was really very neat is that during that process, I think we were just able as a company to learn a lot and to grow closer as a team. It's cheesy, but it's true that you do grow closer to people through adversity. And so I think
Comrades in arms.
exactly. I think we all gained a different level of appreciation and empathy for each other. And yeah, it was just, I think, a remarkable thing to watch a team of people who are devastated, because, something they really love to do has been taken, but then to also see the generosity that came out of that. So anyway, we went from there to being closed down for several months, and then we're back open with restrictions. And I can testify that you can dance in a mask. I've got mine right here. You can do all the things you need to do with it on. So yeah, we've done testing and masking and frequent hand washing, all the things that are recommended by the public health experts to try to keep everything as safe as possible. And we've actually been so fortunate that the mitigations in our community here have worked really well. And even though the U.S. has seen a huge up and down with COVID overall, within our walls, I think we've only had 4 cases at all and no transmissions. So I'm very, very grateful for that, and for a team of people that are keeping each other safe, even as they work in close quarters.
I was going to suggest that now might be the time to adapt a martial arts movie into a ballet. That way, everyone could be ninjas and everybody's wearing a mask already.
See, there you go. Just work it into the costume. I love it. It's perfect. Oh, it's great.
Wonderful. Well, where can people go to find out more about the ballet company and to see some of your work?
Yeah, you can go to our website at ballet58.org. We're on Instagram at ballet58, and on Facebook /ballet58.
Wonderful. And I'll put all of the links in the show notes. Thank you very much for coming on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me, David.
You're welcome. Cheers.